y'all. Welcome to the Liberation is Lit podcast, where the power of storytelling meets the force of social change. I'm your host, Taylor Simon, and in this podcast, we believe in the profound impact of stories. And I'm so excited to kick off season 4 of the podcast. Wow, it's been so long with author Toni Ann Johnson. And I'm really excited to speak with her today about her newest book, But Where is Home? So, hi, Toni Ann. How are you today?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm great. I'm so happy to meet you.
Yes, so happy to meet you as well. So, to start our conversation off today, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer and your journey to becoming an author?
Sure. So I started out my career as an actress in New York. I went to NYU's to school the arts and I got my BFA in drama. And as an actress, I had this ethnically ambiguous look. And as I was out auditioning after school, I started realizing, oh, I think I'm going to need to create material for myself because there's not enough roles that fit me. So I started writing plays. And that led to a play called Gramercy Park is Closed to the Public. And I moved out to LA with that play, hoping to expand my acting career. But I had the play. And within a couple of years, I had a big literary agent then at ICM, Dave Wertschafter. At the time, he also represented Spike Lee, Robert Rodriguez, and the Hudlin brothers. So I was very excited to be with that agency. And I started working as a screenwriter. So I spent over a decade working on screenplays, and I wrote the Ruby Bridges movie, the Disney film about the little girl who integrated the New Orleans public school system. I wrote a Lifetime movie called The Courage to Love that starred Vanessa Williams, and I wrote a film called Crown Heights for Showtime that starred Mario Van Peebles. I did a bunch of drafts of Save the Last Dance, the feature. I didn't end up getting credit, but then I did write the pilot that got made and then didn't get on the air. And then the last big job that I had was Step Up to the Streets. So a few dance projects in there. And then I was beginning to get burned out on the screenwriting, and I was always writing for hire. So I was executing other people's ideas. And I had enjoyed playwriting and I wanted to get back to my own voice. So I stopped writing screenplays for a while. I kind of dropped out of the business. I went back to school, got my MFA in creative writing, and when I came out of that program, I revised a novel that I had written before the program, and I sent that out. I had some difficulty. I wasn't able to find an agent for it right away, and so I started sending it to small presses, and I was able to sell it to a small press. And with that book, I got a nomination for the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work by a debut author. And so that book did pretty well. And then I started working on some stories, short stories that I had started while I was in grad school. They were my thesis project was called Light Skin Gone to Waste. And those initial stories found their way to an agent through a friend. And the agent liked the stories, but after the first draft that I submitted, she said she thought we would have a better shot at selling it if I turned it into a novel. And so I spent 5 years developing this book that swelled to almost 500 pages. And the agent was really confident in it, but she sent it out and all the editors passed and they all felt that it didn't work as a novel. And I knew that the reason it didn't work as a novel is because I conceived it as a story collection. So I sent a portion of the book off to a contest. It was a novella called Homegoing. And I won that contest, and that's how that book came out. It came out from Accents Publishing in May of 2021. And then I took a bunch more of the stories and I submitted it to the Flannery O'Connor Award that Roxane Gay was judging, and I won that. And that's how I got that published. And then I still had, after that book came out, I still had a bunch more stories left over, including the novella But Where's Home and some other stories. And so I added a couple more stories and tweaked the theme a bit, and that became the collection But Where's Home. And I submitted that to the Screen Door Press Prize and won that, and that's how that book is coming out this coming February. So that's a long story short, my writing career so far.
Oh my gosh. And it's amazing just to listen and hear all of the different pivots that you have made in your career from like being an actress and embodying stories, but not seeing enough stories that represented you. So Morrison always said, like, if there's a book that you I want to read, it hasn't been written, you must write it. And so
Absolutely.
that's what you did through like your screenplay writing and your playwright writing and through all of your short stories. And so a lot of your career centers around the short stories and the screenwriting formats.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, why are you passionate about these formats, and what do you believe is the strength, so limitations of these forms of storytelling?
Yeah. So for screenwriting, the limitation is time. You have to be very economical because most movies are 2 hours or fewer. So you don't want to write a script that's 150 pages. Like 120 is now like the longest. But when I was working in the industry, they really preferred them to be around 100 pages, between 100 and 110. And it's hard to tell a complete story in that few pages, and you have to tell everything visually. So everything you put on the page in your screenplay, a director has to be able to figure out how to execute that in shots and with the dialogue. So you have to learn to write visually. And that's a limitation, but it also forces you to be more creative because things that if you were writing something in prose like backstory and stuff, you could go on a tangent and go inside the character's head and, have a long monologue. And sometimes people do that in film with voiceover, but primarily everything is happening in the present tense. There might be flashbacks, but everything is written in the present tense. So we're always like right now and it's happening, it's unfolding in front of us. So that can be challenging. It can be a little bit hard to learn that. When I was teaching screenwriting, that seemed to kind of annoy my students sometimes when I would say, you can't write, and she thought about when da 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 da. Like, you have to write what she's doing, what she's saying, what she looks like, what's in the frame. So those are some of the limitations, but I do feel like it forces you to learn how to tell a story visually, which you can then bring into your fiction. But for me, I had to learn how to write prose. So I didn't really have a prose voice. I had been doing playwriting, and in my playwriting, I did do a lot of monologues. So I had worked on voice. So, like, if a character is speaking in the first person or even in the third person, if it's close third, I did have a sense of like how characters sound and the different ways voices work on the page. But I didn't really have a good sense of how to write just narration prose. And so I tend to I can't say that I do now. It's better than it was when I started, but I tend to write even narration kind of in the voice of the character that I'm focused on. And that is what I like about short stories, is that typically my short stories are about one or two, primarily about one or two characters. And so they're from, one or two people's points of view. And so I get to play around with all those voices. And then I also can play with POV. So I can write in first person, third person, second person, first person plural. Like I love all the different approaches that you can use in a story collection, particularly a linked collection or a novel and stories. That is my favorite form. Like, if you ask me, like, what I'm most passionate about, it would be the novel and stories, even though neither of my 2 collections were called novels and stories. You could read them as such, but I just love that form because you can be all over the place. You can be in a character's, like, beginning, in their way in their past. You can even be in the future, in them imagining, like, what's coming next. You can do all kinds of different voices, and then you can track relationships over time. There's just all kinds of things you can do with linked collections that I guess you could do in a regular novel too, but I haven't been able to do that. So I just really love, love, love that form. And I love reading that form too. It's my favorite.
And I definitely thought that from reading But Where's Home and just seeing like how you play with voice and tenses because the book starts out like from the point of view of Maddie, who is one of the central characters, and she hasn't been born yet, but it's a way of like talking about like how her parents got together and talking
Mhm.
about them as people. And I thought that was a really powerful tool to illustrate. It reminded me a lot of, is it right here within my reach? It is not, but the book Trinity by Zelda Lockhart, which follows like this narrator who is the point of the story is for the narrator to be born. So she's trying to
Oh.
influence like the male figures in her lineage to kind of
Wow.
move and maneuver their lives so she can
Yeah,
be
yeah.
born and things like
I
that.
haven't read
So
that, but I want to now. That sounds great.
yes, yes, it was phenomenal, and it's, like, Southern literature but it also has points where it takes place in the North as well, but though that's kind of well, the book flips between the voice of unborn daughter and the third person point of view of all of the male figures in her lineage, and, I really love, like, the switching of the
Mhm.
points of views because you can tell a fuller story that way. And through But Where's Home being written in stories, like you have the perspective of neighbors in there, you have the perspective of each one of the family members as well as like different time periods and how they go back and see things, but through their different eyes. And I love the way you played around with that.
Thank you. And thank you so much for telling me about Trinity. I'm gonna look for that. That sounds up my alley.
Yes, I'll definitely send you a link to the book, and I'll put it in
Okay.
the show notes for anybody listening who wants to read that one as well.
Okay.
I love the way you played around with that. So, going back to But Where's Home, what inspired you to, well, at least put these collection of stories together as a novella and stories, and what message do you hope to send readers through this book?
So the initial inspiration was I was in graduate school and my mentor at the time, Alma Luz Villanueva, assigned a Sherman Alexie book called The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven. And it was a collection and it kind of went from childhood into adulthood, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But I felt when I read that, I was like, "This is such a great format. I could do this. I think I could do this." And then I read Drown by Junot Diaz, and that too was a linked collection. So that just got my brain going, just thinking, "Wow, like I have all these memories from my own childhood and family and things that still bother me about my childhood that I would like to go back and explore." And so that was the initial thing, and it's about my family, so that's also, the biggest inspiration, but in terms of, like, how I wanted to approach it in stories, it was those 2 books that gave me the idea that I could do this, and, my family was very complicated. It's fictionalized in the books, but it's very close to who we are. Monroe is a real town. That's, like, really where I grew up. We were, like, one of the only Black families there, and that was a really awkward experience being Black in this predominantly white town, but so unlike my sister and my parents, I never lived anywhere else. So I had nothing else to compare it to. I think that both my parents and my sister had an opportunity to be born and grow up in Black environments and have their identity little more constructed properly and maybe in some ways in a more healthy way, and I didn't have that. And so that's also what I was looking at, just trying to parse that out and figure it out and pull things apart. And then the other part of this is my family was highly dysfunctional. My parents both had childhood trauma, and that came out through their parenting. but because I didn't know any better, I didn't really understand what was going on. I knew I didn't like it, but I couldn't define it. I didn't understand what narcissism was or even what childhood trauma was. I was a kid. So just trying to navigate those minefields of family dynamics were inspirational. As far as a message, I can't say that when I was writing the story, I had one particular message, but what arises for me when I think about the stories is the idea of proximity to whiteness and colonized thinking and what I think that the parents felt that proximity to whiteness elevated them in some way, and I don't feel that that's true. And so that conflict in me, just me looking back and saying, yeah, they thought that was really great, but I don't necessarily think it was as great as they thought it was. That was one thing that I was looking at. And that's why I had the cousin character in there, Susie, because Susie isn't influenced as much by colonized thinking. She's a bit more pro-Black, and so she sort of serves as an example as like, "Oh, you could go to a Black school, you could date a Black guy, like, you could, these are options for you that you're not open to because of how you grew up." So I wanted to look at that. I also hope that people who come from dysfunctional families and feel still wounded by that experience, if they read the book, I hope that they'll see maybe some possibilities of, oh, like maybe I could heal from this, or maybe I could make this choice, and that would be helpful to me. So Maddie makes a choice about her relationship with her mother after quite some time. That's a least resort option, but maybe that's an option. If somebody is constantly emotionally abusive, maybe you set a date on when, you're done with that. So things like that. So it wasn't so much a message, but just ideas and hopefully paths maybe are presented in the book that people could consider for their own lives. And hopefully they can see that even with generational trauma, there's still hope for healing. It's not, you don't have to live with it indefinitely. Like you can choose to not sit in that drama and mess, if you will.
Yes, and I like how But Where's Home is a manifestation of you writing yourself back home
Yeah.
and, like, working through your family things and just sharing that and inspiring the world through your own story, and that's purpose enough for telling your story, even if it's a fictionalized account.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Mhm. So, with writing all of these hard things about your life, but also balancing it with writing as a career in general, that can be difficult. What keeps you grounded in this work as a writer and artist?
I love this question, and I feel like there's different ways you could answer it, but I think for these last few books, so But Where's Home, Light Skin Gone to Waste, and Homegoing, they've all been autofiction. And so I've kind of just been grounded in my own experience and processing my family life and the scars that I emerged from that experience with and healing. So that's kept me grounded with these particular books. In the past, I think I was more grounded in writing about race and race relations and that is still part of these books as well, but I wanted to also look at just the complexity of psychological issues in a family that recur, that kind of run through from one generation to the next, and blending both of those things, so it is dealing with race and race relations, but it's more complicated than that because Black people also have mental illness and Black people also have personality disorders. And so there's complexity there that I wanted to look at, and that has kept me coming back to the stories over and over. Like they seem endless to me. Like every time I finish a book, I'm like, oh, I have this other memory that I could look at. There's like all these things. And now that I'm so much older, I have a better perspective on what was actually happening in those moments in ways that I didn't understand when I was a little girl. And that's also kept me grounded in that and at a certain point as a young adult, I don't think I could have written these books because I didn't have the wherewithal to even really consider my parents as full human beings and their desires and hopes and dreams and their backstories. I was only able to look at it from my limited point of view. And as you get older and you've had more experiences, it's easier to one, have grace and sort of say, well, this is why and explore that. But also just, you've lived life. So you've paid a mortgage, you've had bills, you've had a career, you've had other things aside from just you as a young adult. So that helped me to look at my parents, I think, more in a more complex way, and that has grounded me too. I think I'm just endlessly fascinated with those people and as characters, and so Phil and Velma, there's no way that they could actually be my actual parents because I'm writing them, not they're not writing themselves, but that's who they are to me, and even just from my perspective, I'm able to see so much more in them as I write them, as I have to consider, like, what are they feeling in this moment right now? What do they want? What are they hoping for? What are they afraid of? I'm able to do that, and it's really kind of fun. So that has kept me coming back to these stories.
Yes, and I will say, once you realize your parents are people, that will catalyze your healing journey.
Yeah.
Yes. So, do you have any upcoming projects that you wanna share, or do you just wanna tell people what's going on about the book?
Well, I'd love to tell people about this panel that I have coming up at AWP in March. It's on March 6th, and it's a social justice panel. And you are teaching a class on social justice on January 31st, and I'm taking the class in order to help me prepare for this panel. So, Keenan Norris wrote a book called The Confessions of Copeland Kane, and that's kind of the basis for our panel. It's a social justice book. And then there's a number of other panelists, including Tommy Mouton, Deborah Mouton, and one other name that escapes me at the moment. But we are going to be looking at adapting social justice novels for the stage and just talking about social justice writing in general. And so I'm really excited about that because I think for writers seeing that, getting some ideas about ways to bring social justice content to their own communities and their friends and just how to get those stories into the world. I think it's easier now than it was, say, like 30 years ago. We have more options for storytelling, even TikTok and Instagram. There's ways to get your stories across. So I'm excited about that panel. And then the other thing that I am working on is a novel set in New York City in 1990. It's about a mixed race woman who ends up involved with a white New York City cop who, though not an overt racist, is involved in an incident that becomes a racial incident. And so it deals with the complexities of race relations and also the other family stuff that leads her to make the choices that she makes and her history. So all set in New York City.
Oh, that sounds so good. And somebody was just telling me about AWP, and I was like, at the time, I just missed the deadline to apply for a scholarship. And I was like, no.
Yeah.
But I am excited to hear about your panel, and thank you so much for signing up for my workshop for as
Yeah,
preparation. And I'm definitely excited to see. I'm pretty sure there are virtual options, so I'm
I
gonna
think so.
tune
And the
in
other
virtually.
panelists, some of the other panelists are gonna take your class too, so you'll meet them.
I'm
Yeah.
so excited. Yes. And I definitely would love to pick y'all's brains offline.
Okay.
You just like chat more about the work each of you do and see how I can further support for your panel. But we'll talk more about that
Okay,
offline.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. So my last question for you is what advice would you offer listeners who want to make a positive impact in their communities?
I love this question too, because there's, we most of us have multiple communities. Like we have the community that we live in, but a lot of writers also have their literary community. So I have a couple of thoughts about that. I moved to the neighborhood I'm living in now in 2003, and I'm living in South Los Angeles, which is, historically underserved community. It's a different now in 2026 than it was when I moved here in 2003. But what I decided to do is plant trees. I had initially taken this workshop to learn about tree planting, and they taught us all the benefits of trees. And I had come from renting in the Beverly Hills area, and Beverly Hills has plenty of trees and lots of green space, and it's really lush. But when I got here to South LA, there weren't as many trees. There was some green space, but not as much as in the north part of the city. And during this workshop, my mind was blown. They were like, trees purify the air, they make the community feel calmer. People are more likely to take a walk in a neighborhood that has trees than when there aren't any trees. It gives people pride in their community. It makes people feel better, like psychological well-being is enhanced. And I was like, oh my God, if that's all it takes, I'm gonna try to get as many trees as I can. So I started with just my property. And then I did a community beautification project and we added trees on my block. And then the guy who ran the community beautification grant said, well, why don't you look around your community and identify a couple of places that could benefit from trees? And so I picked a grocery store, a Ralph's grocery that had no green space, like no landscaping, no trees, nothing. And I asked them, I thought for sure they would just say yes, because there was a nonprofit that would cut the concrete, plant the trees, and all the store would have to do was water them. And they said no. And the first they made me jump through hoops. They said, well, give us a site map and all this stuff. And I jumped all the hoops and they still said no. And then I was really angry. And I wasn't working at the time. I was in graduate school, but it wasn't that challenging. I was just going to school. I didn't have a job and I had a lot of time to just let everybody know how awful it was that they weren't gonna plant these trees. So I wrote an op-ed, I did a video, I did a letter campaign, and finally somebody in the mayor's office heard about me and I had a meeting with them and they kind of pulled me into this program called Million Trees LA. And so then they talked to the store and persuaded them to say yes. And then it turned into this big tree planting. So we had like 100 people come out. There was like press, like we did interviews and the Boy Scouts came and my block club and friends from different neighborhoods came and we planted 20 trees in that planting. But then somehow just from that, the city decided, oh, this community could use even more trees. So then they kind of picked up the mantle and like took it and they planted more trees and I was able to come and help with that, but I didn't have to organize that one. So all in all, we planted about 45 trees. This finally happened in 2010. It took a long time for me to get it together, but most of those trees are still alive. Some were vandalized, but I feel like it really made a lasting impact and hopefully the trees will outlive all of us who planted them. And it does make the neighborhood nicer. It beautifies it and hopefully people are more inclined to take a walk because there's trees in their community and I think it just makes people feel better to have something growing alive like around them. So there's that, but if that's not your thing, I mean, I think what you do has, you have to be passionate about something. And my advice is pick something that if it gets difficult, you're not going to give up on, that you're really into, that's going to, if somebody says no, you're going to get mad and say, well, I'm not taking no. for an answer and then you follow through. So find what that is for you. But if it's your literary community that you want to make an impact on, my advice is if you don't know about women who submit, Google women who submit. And if there's no chapter in your city, either start one or if there is one, join one. But Women Who Submit is an amazing organization. I think they started in 2010. We started in LA. My colleague from graduate school, Sochi Julissa Bermejo, was one of the founders, and Dr. Ashaki Jackson was another, and Alice Dixon was another. And now we have chapters all over the country. We have, and in Mexico and in Europe. And the idea of Women Who Submit is designed to encourage women to submit their work for publication so that more of us get published. And this was inspired by the Vita count. So back in 2010 or 2009, whenever they looked at this, it became clear that most of the top journals were publishing men. And the reason is men are less likely to be discouraged when they get rejected. They'll just submit somewhere else, where women feel like, oh, it's not good, I'm not good enough, and they give up. Or they don't realize like how much you have to submit. It's a numbers game. And so Women Who Submit will teach you like where to submit, how to start a spreadsheet, say like submit to 20 places, and if those places reject it, find another 20 and keep submitting. They just encourage you to not give up. And of course, like if you get some constructive feedback and you want to revise your work, yes, revise, but then resubmit and keep track of the editors that say this wasn't right for us, but if you have something else, and then do submit something else to those places. But it has helped more people become published and just teach people like how to submit. A lot of people don't know that if you get 5 rejections, that doesn't mean you should throw away that story. It means it hasn't found the right home. So you keep submitting until you find the place that wants to publish it, and it's out there. So that's a way to make an impact on your literary community. So those are my 2 things.
Yes, and I love how both of them are literally planting seeds for more beautiful things and change and growth to happen in communities. When you said you wrote a letter to the editor about the tree planting process, that is something I'm a part of Authors Against Book Bans, and that's something that we're always talking about. How can we continue to write letters to the editor, write to our elected officials? We're writers after all. So finding time to do some of that writing about issues you're passionate about, whether it's the local issue where you're writing your local newspaper or something larger and organizing whole campaigns or writing your federal elected officials and things like
Yeah.
that.
I would recommend op-eds too. So that's what I wrote letters to Kroger, the parent company of Ralph's, but I also wrote an op-ed for the Los Angeles Times about the trees. And it was tricky because Ralph's was also an advertiser. And so they didn't really want me to like disrespect Ralph's too severely because they didn't want to lose that advertising. So I couldn't say all of what I really wanted to say, but there was enough in there. And because it was in this, a paper that a lot of people still read at the time, I'm not sure about now, that, 2010 or whenever that came out, maybe it was 2009. It was a long time ago. But yeah, like include op-eds in your, in just where you think about submitting, I think, because they get a different readership, I think, than just the letters to the editor. So it's, it just says expand your reach. And it's the same skill almost, as a letter. So
Yeah, definitely. So use those skills for good, writers.
yeah.
So thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. Where can
Thank you.
people find you and keep up with you and your work?
The easiest place I think is Instagram. My Instagram handle is at Tree Lady, TreeLady, Toni Ann, ToniAnn. And it's the same on Threads. I do have a website, www.toniannjohnson.com, and I have a Facebook author page, but in terms of where I mostly interact, it's Instagram and Threads.
And I will definitely link all of those places in the show notes so you can check out and keep up. And most importantly, pre orders are very important for authors. So I will have a link in the show notes to pre order But Where's Home, which is coming out in February. So you can check that out. So thank you so much again, Tony Ann. And thank you, listeners, for being a part of the Liberation is Lit podcast. If you have stories you want to share or want to suggest any topics or just want to connect with us, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Liberation is Lit or our website, liberationislit.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review. And remember, your voice matters. And together, through the lens of stories, we're going to make a difference in the world. Until next time.
Thank you, Taylor.